I love copper flashing, but a chimney can be an intimidating project. But it's really not that bad if you ask a pro how to do it. We went to Diami Plotke of Roof Services in Deer Park, New York. You're going to love it.
At Roof Services, we bend a lot of commercial and residential metal, so we have a big sheet metal shop with a big shop-mounted brake. This brake works very similar to the way the portable brake is going to work. Both the shop-mounted and the portable brakes have an upper and lower jaw that clamp and immobilize the metal, and a tongue that moves up to bend the metal. So while I'm going to use this to demonstrate how we make flashings, all the techniques we use on this brake are going to be identical to those used on a portable brake. This is a sample of the cut-in reglet counter flashing we're going to go through making. This is one of the more complicated pieces of metal that need to be fabricated for a chimney flashing. You can see we've got a strength hem along the bottom that provides a nice straight and clean line. The vertical face that covers the step flashing. This horizontal leg returns into the chimney in the reglet that we cut in with the grinder. And this little return lap, when we slide it in, we put wedges in there and that springs up to hold it in place. We're starting with a 6-inch width because that gives us the right amount of vertical coverage. This vertical leg here we have a little bit of flexibility in, and by going with a 6-inch width we get efficient use of the 36-inch wide sheet. First thing I do is, always starting at the face towards me, I'm going to mark out to reference my bend marks. And you always want to reference your bend marks from a single face out, because if you were to measure one in from this side and one in from this side, any error in the way the sheet is cut will transfer to your bend marks, and when the piece is bent, it won't come out straight. This way, since everything is referenced off one face, the final bend might be slightly uneven, but everything else, especially the vertical face that everyone will see, is going to be nice and consistently measured. Our first bend is at 1 1/8, and we simply line the awl up next to the tape, and for copper, a single tap is enough. And the next bend is at 3 15/16. Again, a single tap is enough. Now I'm going to go mark the other end. I'm going to make these marks with an awl because the dimple that it makes is going to be visible on both sides of the copper sheet. And once we start to bend it, you'll see that we're going to be constantly flipping it over, and we're going to want to make sure that the dimples are in the exact same spots on both sides so we don't lose our markings once we flip the sheet. The first bend we're going to make is this hem on the back. That will be the piece that ends up going in the wall. The next bend we make is this leg that turns from the vertical face into the horizontal leg that goes in the wall. The third bend we make is this bend down here that transitions from the vertical to the kick. And the final bend we make is this strength hem that comes down behind the kick. If we were to do them in a different order, you could end up crushing some of these hems that we want to leave open. And even worse than that is this kick right here, it could get crushed or distorted if it was made too soon and caught in the brake as you made subsequent bends. On a longer piece like this, it's very helpful to have a second person to help load the brake without bending the metal and to operate the second side of the brake. When we load the brake, it's important to put the metal in the right order and the right orientation. So I've paid attention to the order I'm going to make my brakes. I've got the first mark here, and we're actually not going to bend on that first mark, but we're going to use that first mark to orientate it. And for this first bend, we're going to bring it in flush with the outside of this lip. At that point, we're going to bring the top jaw down, lock it in, and because this is a strength hem, we're going to return it all the way back to this lip. So we're going to completely bend it. And that will provide us with the lip we want on the top leg. To make the next bend, because it's going to be bent in the opposite direction, we actually have to pull the whole piece out and flip it over and reinsert it. On a small piece like this, you could see I could handle that on my own, but on a larger 10-foot piece or on a piece that is wider, has a bigger stretch, two people really come in handy to make that flip without kinking and damaging the metal. Now that we've got it reinstalled, you can see the dimple there that we made when we were marking the metal, and we're going to split the dimple with the top jaw, just like that, so that when we make our bend, it's right at the dimple. Now we're going to bring this up just shy of 90 degrees because we don't want this ends up being the horizontal leg, and we don't want this to be back pitched. We're going to pull it out again because, again, we're bending in an opposite direction now. We're going to keep flipping back and forth as this goes on. So we're going to bring it to our mark. And again, bring the top jaw down, centered on the mark. And now this time we're bending the slight kick that's at the bottom of the vertical face. So we're just going to, just a slight bend. And we do these bends almost entirely by eye. So just enough to kick the metal away from the vertical face. We're ready for the final bend now. As with all the previous ones, we pull it out and flip it over because we're, again, switching sides. And this last bend we didn't mark. So what I'm going to do is bring the previous bend right to the edge of this lip and crush it down right there. And I tend to use this lip as the spacer and the sizing for my strength hems. It just makes it that much more efficient and there's less marking to do. So now that we've got this locked in, we're going to bend it and we bring this all the way around. With that last bend made, we're all done. Unlock the brake, pull it out, and there is our completed cut-in reglet counter flashing.
And you can go whenever you're ready.
We have on the bench now laid out pieces of the base flashings that go around the chimney. The first piece we made is this lower apron. And this is, of the base flashing pieces, this is the most complicated because it has two bends. We have a strength hem here at the bottom that gets bent over and crushed to provide a nice, straight, strong edge. And this simple bend that transitions from the plane of the roof up the bottom of the chimney. This piece is going to be installed on the downslope side of the chimney. It'll be cut to the appropriate length. The vertical leg will be cut along this bend and bent onto the sides of the chimney. And then we start with step flashing that run down the sides. And the step flashing tucks beneath the vertical leg that wraps the side, and the horizontal leg of the step flashing will lap over the apron here to properly shed water. The step flashing is a very simple piece to bend. It can even be bent by hand on the roof if you have to. When bending the step flashing, the trick is to not overbend this. It's much better to have a step flashing that is springy and wants to hold the joint open than to have one that is overbent like this, and when you install it, wants to pull away from the wall or lift the shingles up. That can be a big problem. Luckily with copper, I can simply rebend it with my hands. With aluminum, overbending can be a bit more of an issue. But when we're installing the step flashing, we stack them over each other in steps, and they tuck in between individual courses of shingles. At the bottom, they will lap over this apron, and at the top, they'll run up to the top of the chimney. Once we get to the top of the chimney, we switch to a different pan. This one even simpler. This pan only has one bend. It does not need a strength hem at the back. And this fits behind the chimney. In the case of a chimney that's about 18 inches wide or less, we can get away with a single one-piece copper pan, and it'll be more than enough to keep it watertight. As we begin to get to wider chimneys, 24 inches and above, we should really be installing a cricket behind the chimney to actively divert water around. But in the case of a small chimney, we'll set this behind the chimney. This long leg is on the plane of the roof. The vertical leg runs up the chimney. We'll bend the vertical leg to wrap around the chimney just as we would the bottom pan. And this horizontal leg will lap onto the adjoining step flashing that run down the sides. Once we have this base flashing installed around the four sides of the chimney, then we will install the cut-in reglet counter flashing, which will fit into a cut-in slot on the chimney, such as this, to properly cover the top edge of the base flashing, providing a watertight joint.